Welcome to the Boulos Beat podcast series. I'm Tony McDonald, partner at the Boulos Company, filling in for my partner, Greg Boulos, who's elsewhere on assignment. Boulos Company is Northern New England's largest commercial real estate firm. We've been active in sales and leasing of commercial properties since 1975. Our podcast series focuses on business leaders, movers and shakers. And speaking of business leaders, welcome Jean Hoffman, who's the founder of several life science type companies here in Greater Portland. Those include Newport Data Systems, where I first met you, then Putney, which I met you again, and you ultimately sold. And Jean's very active and entrepreneurial in that space here in this area. Could you tell us a little bit about how you ended up here, how you did the things you did, and just your experience to get to where you are now?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Tony, for years of helping my businesses grow. We did first meet with Newport Strategies, what we changed the name to when we moved it from Brunswick to Portland. And that was really a key move in the evolution of that business. We moved from Brunswick to Portland with the thought, which proved correct, that we would be much better able to recruit people to Portland. People wanted to work in Portland. This was 1997, I think. So it was a long time ago.
It was.
And you got us that space on the top floor of 215 Commercial Street, the whole floor. And that was actually critical to our growth. It was something that we had expected, that we could recruit people better to Portland, but it really proved true. And the space was critical to our growth as a business.
I remember meeting you and you trying to explain what your business was. And
I remember you asking great questions.
And it kind of didn't really exist yet, but you had this plan. And I just remember thinking to myself, there's something about this lady that makes this worthwhile. I'm not sure what she's doing, but it's going to work. And that was Newport, yeah. And you sold Newport, right?
Yes, Newport I built without any investors. And so it was small, but...
what did it do? What did Newport do? I still don't know.
Newport was a healthcare information technology company. And we had proprietary data that we had developed through our own research. And then we developed this software system around it that was also proprietary. And I licensed in a lot of other sets of data. And we built something that through the combination of data, which is something talked about today, big data and the insights from data. So we did it back in the 90s, and it was still very early. And it was hard to explain it, even to bright guys with degrees from MIT like you. And so with that proprietary data and with that system, we built the architecture to help the then nascent generic drug industry source the active ingredients to make generic drugs. In fact, I was recently honored for this as one of the founders of the generic drug industry, because that was one of the critical parts of the infrastructure of building the generic drug industry that has saved Americans so many billions of dollars.
And that was based on humans, right?
That was a decision we made. Data is data, and you can derive a lot of insights from data depending on the data and how you look at it. But one of the decisions we made pretty early on was we are going to define this as data about drugs for humans. But we knew that drugs for animals were, from a data point of view, just another subset of data out there. But we focused on drugs for humans and on sourcing those drugs, the APIs, and then on the insights about which drugs to develop that would be more profitable for the generic industry. But yes, we left out the animal drugs.
Intentionally at that time, you focused on humans.
Focus is one of the most important things in entrepreneurial success. So that was one of the decisions on what to focus on.
Yeah. So you sold that to, was it Thomson Reuters?
That's right, Thomson Reuters, big public company.
And was that the plan, or did they just knock on your door one day, or how did that come to pass?
So that's a very interesting question. The whole area of data, as we now all know, is still evolving, and it was really starting to pick up speed then. And so these large companies in the healthcare space were consolidating, and all of the pieces of data were being bought up. And we at Newport, right here in Portland, Maine, had one of the last really valuable sets of data that was not owned by anyone. But we were dependent on some of these big players because we also licensed their data and combined it with our special little set of data. So really looking at the big picture and the consolidation in the healthcare information technology industry, a sale was inevitable. And I was ready to move on and do something else. I like new challenges.
So I'll take over for a moment now. So Jean sells her company, kind of disappears off my radar screen, other than every once in a while, let's have a coffee or, say hello. And then she calls me one day and says, Tony, I'm starting a new company. I need about 2,500 square feet of space. In 1 year, it's either going to be out of business or I'm going to need 25,000 square feet of space. That was when you were starting Putney. And coming from most people, I wouldn't pay much attention to that. With her, I just wrote it down and said, yep, that's the deal. And so we went out and found space up at 400 Congress Street and explained it to the landlord who I had a long relationship with and a track record. And they kind of trusted me to vet tenants a little bit. And I said, look, this woman is worth taking a shot at. And so you went in there and...
Actually, you've forgotten a step, Tony.
Oh, no.
So first you put me in 120 Exchange Street.
Right.
A very small office.
Right.
And that was my interim consulting company. Let me look around and see what I want to do next.
Right.
Space that you found for us. And then, as you relate, we started Putney and started hiring people in that teeny tiny space.
Right.
And before you got us the larger space at 400 Congress, we had people who didn't have desks.
Right.
We had some cardboard boxes. We had people who would sit on the floor to talk on a landline that was tethered to the wall because there weren't enough of those.
Yeah.
So
and this was the same building, different entrance.
Yes, and
120
you took us around
Exchange,
the corner of that
400
same
Congress,
building.
same landlord, and that's why we did that, knowing that 120 was pretty good for small tenants, 400 was good for big tenants, and if you grew, we were going to push you through the wall into 400 and go over there. So, and that worked out okay.
That worked out great.
Yeah,
that was
animal based, correct?
That company was there was this interim advisory company that did work mostly M&A advisory for other firms in human and animal pharma, but then Putney was what I next started. And yes, that was a generic drug company for pets.
And was that really the same thing as Newport? It wasn't, was it? Newport managed data, whereas Putney actually produced
You're absolutely
drugs.
right.
Right.
Putney was actually a drug company.
Yeah.
And the first time, and as yet the only time, well, no, there's a couple other small ones, but it was the first time there was a drug company in Maine, which was not easy to do. But we had a global footprint through an outsourced business model. So we worked with other manufacturers around the world who had the technology to make the drugs that we oversaw the development of and took through the FDA. The FDA has to approve drugs for pets too.
Oh, they do? Okay. Yeah.
And then we, as you well know, we kept growing and growing in that space. And then a couple times, remember, times were tough, 2009, 2010, and then we got hit with this big lawsuit with Pfizer Animal Health and had that big battle and were short of capital. So then we subleased some space and kept and we kept trading space in the same building.
Right, yeah.
Fortunately, our cycles were well aligned.
Yeah, it all worked out.
And in the end, Kepware after their sale, expanded and took over our space
Right.
in that building.
And we moved you as you grew. You outgrew 400 Congress Street.
We outgrew it.
And we just kept going west. We went from 120 Exchange through the wall to 400 Congress. Then we pushed across the street to Monument Square.
Yes.
And that's really where Putney really seemed to spread its wings and become an enormous company.
2 whole floors there.
Yeah, yeah.
I can remember you explaining things to me like windows that were in a window and windows were more vertical, and some of the choices and preferences. I mean, down to these little things that, looking at real estate, I didn't know.
Yeah. I don't know pharma. So how long did you have Putney, roughly?
It was about 10 years.
10 years? And you sold that to Decra? Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Decra, yes, which is a publicly held. Both of my company exits have been to larger publicly traded companies. Decra is a vet pharmaceutical company traded on the stock exchange in the United Kingdom, in London.
Interesting. So there's this cluster or experience with you of life sciences and pharma and veterinary pharma. There seems to be, to me anyway, a lot of that happening in the greater Portland area as far as animal-based or veterinary-based life science type things. Is that coincidental? Is that why you did this here? Is that stuff here because you started doing that type of thing here and you were one of the first ones to have a veterinary pharma presence in this area? IDEX, of course, also, but are those just coincidental, or do they feed on each other, or did you find that you could recruit people here into the life sciences pharma world because there was other things like that around here, or
That's a
or
really...
is there a relationship there, or I'm just seeing something that's not there?
It's a big question, and it's an important question for gauging what makes a company successful and where should it be located, which has changed somewhat with COVID. So let me speak to that. The first one here was IDEX. And why was IDEX started here? David Shaw was here. David Shaw had the vision, the foresight. He liked living in Maine, and he started IDEX here.
Agritech, actually. I remember it was Agritech originally.
And it grew, and it was successful, and John Ayers took it to vast, great heights, and now Jay is doing a marvelous job leading what is a huge and still very, very successful company, now public. So with the growth of IDEX and with its scaling, there are lots of people here. And with IDEX growing to be a multi-billion-dollar public company from startup roots, there are lots and lots of people who were successful parts of IDEX in the early days that are not the right fit or don't want to change their skill set to be part of this big public company or to be small pieces of a cog in a great big wheel. So that dynamic frees people. It creates some very, very healthy churn of people. IDEX is always recruiting and bringing in new people to fuel their growth. And some of those people want to do something else, but they have a basic skill set and mindset. And so there have been other companies growing out of IDEX, and Dave Shaw with his son Ben started Vet's First Choice, and then convinced another vet company to do this merger that became Covetrus. So why did I start Putney here? Or why did I start either of those companies here? Same reason, I live here and I love it here. It's a fabulous place to live. It's a great place to raise kids, and I raised both my kids here. And I believed I could do it with Putney distributed business model, the outsourced business model. The vast majority of our team were always here. not all of them, but the majority. But we worked with companies around the globe, and people traveled a lot to make that work. So you could say it was an early version of globally collaborating and not having to have everybody in one place. In fact, working with all of these partners around the world enabled us to do more and take advantage of expertise that wasn't here and which is never going to be here. So the takeaway is Portland is a place where if you're an entrepreneur and if you know how to start and build a company, you can start a company here. And certainly COVID has enabled the world to understand that you don't have to be geographically located in one place to work together or to collaborate with people. So in many ways, it's made it easier.
Maine has historically been considered a tough place to do business because we're at the end of the supply chain. We're at the end of the distribution route. It's not a good place to distribute from because we're a long ways away from everything. It's hard to get stuff here because we're a long ways away from everything. What I'm seeing with you is data. Data has been central to a lot of these things you've done. And companies like Covetrus, Rare Breed, others, I think, there's a big data component to what they do. Well, it doesn't cost money to ship data. Data doesn't care whether it's going from a server in Portland, Maine to Portsmouth, New Hampshire or Portsmouth, England. It's the same trip either way. You press the button and off it goes. And and now we see the Roux Institute coming in with its focus on artificial intelligence. And I wonder, is that starting to paint a picture for what Maine and Greater Portland can really succeed in, is inputting and exporting data, creating data, and manipulating data, because the shipment costs there's no friction in shipping data. Is there anything to that?
Absolutely. It's a good insight. And the other part of it, which mere mortals are still getting their arms around, is that the location of the goods and the location of the people directing the strategy in the business, there's no reason for them to be in the same place. So Putney, we did develop drugs. There were actual products, bottles of pills and vials of injectable drugs. Covetrus ships stuff. They ship all kinds of stuff, and they are primarily a tech-enabled delivery and shipping organization. But the stuff doesn't have to be here. It doesn't have to be anywhere. If you think about where should warehouses be located, you don't think about locating them here unless you're serving the local market with something perishable or something that is hyper-local. But there's no relationship between the people directing shipments and the physical location of the shipments. They don't need to be. They're connected via computers. They're not physically in the same place.
Yeah, shipping doesn't need to be down the hall.
It doesn't need to be down the hall.
It needs to be down the
there
internet.
are other considerations as to where you manufacture your products. Where is the expertise for that? And in anything pharma related or medical device related or diagnostics related, which is what IDEX does, your manufacturing is completely dependent on skilled people and people with knowledge of the regulatory parameters. IDEX has built that in Maine. In pharma, it doesn't exist in Maine, but that is the driver for where you locate that manufacturing. But again, the strategists and the people running the business aren't necessarily going to be, nor should they be, located where that manufacturing is. We made one product in New Zealand. I guarantee it wasn't because it was convenient.
Right, right.
It wasn't because we wanted to go to New Zealand, even though I hear it's a lovely place.
Was it for sheep? I'm guessing, maybe?
No, it wasn't for sheep. It was for dogs. But the technology and expertise at a particular company in New Zealand were present and very good for a specific type of product.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you go there. Geography is largely irrelevant.
Interesting. So everything you've just said bodes well for a place like Portland, because we can do anything from here. If you were advising an entrepreneur who was thinking of, or was going to start a business, open a business, expand a business, and they were thinking of possibly doing it in Maine, you've just told us about lots of good things. Are there challenges? I mean, you ran international pharma companies from Portland, Maine. Are there challenges to being here that you wouldn't face if you were elsewhere?
There are challenges to anywhere. If you start the company here in the early days where costs matter, it's much more affordable. But particularly post-COVID, we really are so close to Boston. You know, if you have to commute from Portland to Boston every day, there's a lot of traffic. It's 2 hours each way, and you might get stuck. Friday, you might not make it home till really late.
Right.
That's pretty unpleasant to contemplate.
Yeah.
At least for me, I don't like traffic. It's one reason I love it here. But if you're going in for a team meeting once a week, or for a couple days a week, or 3 days a month, that's easy.
Sure.
So this is a great place to live. And if you're going into Boston less frequently, it's really easy.
Yeah.
And so that has made it easier to live here, but it's also broadened our pool of people and our access to talent. The Roux Institute you mentioned is going to make a huge difference. I serve on the board of the Jackson Lab with Dave Roux. He's an amazing man. And his generosity, and now others coming in to build that institute as a part of Northeastern and train people, it's going to have a huge impact, not only in X number of highly IT, AI smart people, but just the spillover effect. And, you know, every person who moves in here, who builds value here, who creates a company, who's part of it, they upgrade their house. You know, they need a lot of sheetrocking.
Yeah.
And they need plumbing and electrical. And we've got now a good university system between SMCC and some of their trade programs, between USM, where I've in particular supported the Promise Scholarship there. And, you know, they have these little gems like a great music school. So you have really a growing kind of locus of energy and people and virtuous cycle of building activity here that I think is starting and will spill out more even into west of Portland, which is more in need of economic development and where housing is much more affordable.
Sure.
And offices are even more affordable. So it's really exciting, and to have seen that since 97 and how much it's changed. It's so much easier to recruit people here now. Portland, Maine is on the map in a way that it wasn't when I first moved here in 97.
You know, we talked about Boston pricing, and I was advising a client a couple of years ago on where to locate their offices. And one of the options, it was the most expensive option. It was new construction. It was in the waterfront area. It's where people wanted to be. And I did this analysis for them, and I showed them how this is the most expensive place by the square foot. But when you figured it out by dollars per person, the incremental cost to be in that location versus a lesser location, lesser building, was about $1,811 per person per year. I remember the number. And I'm thinking that's a big number. And they said, that's it? You're telling me I can be there in that building that's not built yet for $1,800 a person per year more? Their biggest challenge, one of their largest challenges, was recruiting, bringing people from outside of this area. And they looked at that and said, you know, if someone had told me, well, gee, if you'll pay me an extra $1,800 a year, I'll move to Portland. Done. And his thinking was, I don't even need to do that. I need to show them they're going to be sitting here looking out at the water. They can go kayaking at lunch, and they can go walking on this trail, and it's going to cost me $1,800. Sign me up. And it's interesting, as a real estate guy, we get wound up on the numbers sometimes, and I thought that was such a big leap. But for them, it was, you know, thank you for all your advice, but stop bothering me. We're taking the expensive car. You know, we're not buying the cheap car. So.
Well, and that's such a good point, Tony. Another part of that I'm seeing and that I think would be really interesting to a real estate guy, and that is really interesting for this area, is people whose reporting, they work somewhere else. They work in New York in financial services. They work in Boston. They work in Cambridge. And yet they live here and largely work remotely. And there are more and more of those people. So these are not companies starting here, though those people may break off from their big companies and join a smaller company, especially smaller companies that have high potential and good venture capital backing when those happen here. But these are people who are working for large companies, some of the biggest financial services firms in New York, the big names. There are people who are part of those companies who are here in Maine now.
Right.
And there are, I suspect, a lot of people from the greater Boston and Cambridge area who are here and moving here. And they can work together as part of a smaller team. And I suppose they'll be renting some smaller spaces. In other words, not the 2 floors in One Monument Square that you put us in, but smaller spaces where they have confidentiality and privacy and can have meetings. And, you know, people grow out of those, whatever you call those, co-working things. And those kinds of groups of people, but who have much more, large employer relationships and a level of sophistication, come back and forth, that's also really exciting.
Yeah.
And some of those people who are young staff members may go through the Roux Institute, or some of those people coming through the Roux Institute may work for larger employers located elsewhere, but want to be based here. Again, geography is becoming much less a factor in terms of where you can be located. There's much more freedom to that. And it's more about where do you want to be? And you have much more options, many more options for where you work. Mm-hmm. That's really cool.
It is cool. Yeah. Any predictions for this area? Any warnings for this area? Those are not fair questions, but anything coming to mind?
You're way smarter than I am about those sorts of things.
I don't know. I mean, I'll answer my own question and see what you think.
Please.
I've been doing this a long time, and I'm a 4-cycle guy. I've been up and down and up and down, up and down, up and down. And I don't think I've ever felt the optimism or the enthusiasm in Portland and Maine, southern Maine in general, that I'm seeing right now, in that so many of the other booms, if you will, they've been based on a large employer employing a lot of people in cube farms, and those companies, they come and they go. call center type work, which is great for employment, but it doesn't necessarily increase the economic viability
It's hard
of
to
an
raise
area.
a family
It's hard to raise a family
when
working
you're
in
working
a
in a call center.
The companies we see coming here now, some small, some large, but they're really interesting and really have the potential to do things. And when I see that trend happening, and it's been hastened by COVID, because as you pointed out, people have realized I don't need to be in the office. I can work from home. Well, I guess that means my home could be any place. Why not live someplace nice and move to Maine? So we're seeing some of that. And it just seems that there are these fertile seeds of interesting growing industries in this area. A lot of intellectual capital, not manufacturing, but data. And then I look at the Roux Institute almost as fertilizer being spread on those seeds to help grow the people that are going to staff and run those businesses. I mean, there may be one or two visionaries that come up with this idea, and you need them. Exhibit A. But you also need smart, properly educated people with the right skill sets to take that visionary's ideas and make it a business, make it actually work. And I feel like that's happening right now.
I agree. So three points. One, having built 2 companies here, companies are all about talent. Now I'm active on boards, and as an investor, I invest based on the caliber of the founders and the talent in the company. It is all about people. And so Maine has more people developing here, staying here, moving in, and then the Roux Institute, as you say, powerful fertilizer.
Right.
A couple of trends. So the coolest person I know is my nephew, Max. And Max went to college out near Seattle. And he graduated in 2014. And he started telling me before he came east that he was hearing about Portland, Maine out there amongst his generation of, he's a designer, his generation of really cool people. That was one of the early warning signs about how cool this place would become. And the second data point for me is the inability to get a plumber here. As you know,
it's a good metric.
Projects are held up now over inability to get a plumber.
Right.
And an electrician is another big bottleneck. And sheetrocking.
Right.
And so we have talented people coming here, interested in being here and being homegrown and built through the Roux Institute and through this growth in a couple big companies. You know, it's not just about life sciences. WEX is bringing in and growing a lot of great people too. And we have growth coming off of a year like no other, a year of a pandemic. Still, so much building is taking place.
Right.
And you know well at Boulos, this inability to get enough skilled tradespeople.
Right.
That's a great sign. You know, we need all of these different people, and that's all creating economic value and opportunity and growth for everyone.
Right. It's a great place. We're lucky to be here.
We are.
And thank you all for joining us on the Boulos Beat. And we hope you'll come back and watch us again. Thank you.
And if you'd like to learn more about the Boulos Company, please be sure to visit us at www.boulos.com. You can also find us at the Boulos Company on Facebook and LinkedIn, and at the Boulos Co. on Instagram and Twitter.